The moment you wake up, before you reach for anything at all, get out of bed. Leave your phone exactly where it is. In another room if possible, or at minimum somewhere you'd have to walk back to retrieve it, not simply within arm's reach on silent. Get dressed enough to go outside if the weather allows and start walking. It doesn't need to be fast. It doesn't need a destination. Around the block, down the driveway and back, along a hallway if outdoor access genuinely isn't available. The specifics matter less than the continuity. Keep moving, without stopping to check anything, without narrating the walk to yourself, without your phone anywhere on your body, for 7 consecutive minutes, letting the time pass without counting it down in your head. If you can do this somewhere with an open view of the sky and enough space to see more than a few meters ahead of you, even better. If you can't, walking without your phone is still worth doing on its own. Just move, outside if possible, unphotographed, unrecorded, unchecked, for 7 minutes before the day asks anything else of you. There's no single-named study behind this exact video. No research team has run a controlled trial on 7 minutes of phone-free morning walking and published a tidy result showing it improves anything specific. That's worth saying plainly before anything else, because what actually happens during those 7 minutes isn't one mechanism. It's several genuinely separate, independently studied phenomena that happen to overlap inside a single ordinary walk. Your retina encountering real outdoor light, your legs and vestibular system engaging in rhythmic locomotion, and your attention operating without a smartphone anywhere nearby to quietly compete for it. Each of those 3 things has its own research literature, its own limitations, and its own honest uncertainty. None of them, on their own, adds up to a guarantee about how your particular morning will go, which is, in its own way, the more interesting story than the usual version of this kind of video tends to tell. An ordinary 7-minute walk turns out to be a small, natural experiment running 3 separate studies at once, on you, without anyone needing to design it that way. Before we untangle what's actually happening in each of those 3 separate threads, if a video willing to say, "We don't know that," as often as it says, "Here's what we do know," is worth having in your feed. Subscribing keeps that kind of care coming automatically. And a like on this one is a real, useful signal for exactly this approach. It helps to be specific about which systems in your body are actually doing something during those 7 minutes, rather than treating morning walk as one vague, undifferentiated wellness activity that somehow does everything at once. Your retina contains a population of light-sensitive cells, distinct from the rods and cones, responsible for ordinary vision, that feed a direct pathway toward the suprachiasmatic nucleus in your hypothalamus, the structure most closely associated with regulating your daily biological rhythm. Separately, and largely independently, the act of walking itself engages your vestibular system, the balance-sensing structures in your inner ear, along with sensory motor and executive attention circuits that coordinate rhythmic, repetitive movement through space over time. And separately again, whatever your attention is or isn't competing against, a phone nearby, notifications, the pull to check something, draws on limited executive attentional resources that behave differently, depending on what's physically present in your immediate environment, whether or not you're actively using it at any given moment. Here's the detail worth sitting with. None of these 3 systems require the other 2 to function properly on their own. Your retina responds to morning light whether or not you're moving. Your legs and vestibular system respond to walking whether or not there's a phone nearby. Your attentional capacity responds to the presence or absence of a phone, whether or not you're outdoors at all. This video bundles all 3 into a single 7-minute walk, because doing so is practical and achievable before most people's day gets away from them entirely. Not because the walk itself has been tested as one single unified intervention in any published study, Treating it as one clean, proven mechanism would overstate what the underlying research actually shows, and this video would rather undersell the effect than oversell it. The common assumption around most morning routine advice is that it's built from a single validated mechanism dressed up in different clothing. Get outside, feel better, done. The evidence here supports something more honest and, frankly, more useful. Several separately documented systems, each with its own real but bounded evidence base, that happen to combine cleanly into one ordinary 7-minute action. There's a specific number worth knowing here since it grounds the light-related thread in something concrete rather than a vague sense that morning light is generally good for you. The cortisol awakening response, under typical conditions, produces a rise of somewhere around 50 to 75% above the cortisol level measured at the moment of waking, occurring within the first 30 to 45 minutes afterward, before declining again across the rest of the morning. This isn't a stress spike in the sense most people associate with the word cortisol. It's a normal, healthy part of the transition from sleep to active wakefulness, and it's precisely this window that the Petrowski research examined in relation to light exposure. Knowing the rough shape and timing of that natural response is part of why the first several minutes after waking, rather than sometime later in the morning, is the window this video focuses on, even though the 7-minute figure itself remains a practical choice rather than a number drawn directly from that research. The first thread concerns light and your neuroendocrine wake-up process specifically. In 2019, Katja Petrovsky, Bjarne Schmalbach, Matthias Niedling, and Tobias Stalder published research examining how light exposure shortly after waking affects the cortisol awakening response. The sharp, healthy rise in cortisol that normally occurs in the 30 to 45 minutes following waking, distinct from cortisol's more familiar reputation as a stress hormone. Their findings has indicated that the intensity and spectral composition of post-awakening light exposure could influence the magnitude of that cortisol rise in healthy male participants. It's important to be precise about what this study actually tested: controlled light exposure conditions in a research setting, not a 7-minute outdoor walk, and not participants of every age or sex. The finding is a genuine published result about light and this specific hormonal response. It is not direct evidence that walking outside for 7 minutes reliably produces the same effect, even though the underlying light-sensing pathway involved is the same one your retina would encounter on an actual morning walk. The second thread concerns the broader question of how natural light patterns entrain your circadian clock, independent of any single hormone measurement. Kenneth Wright and colleagues at the University of Colorado Boulder's Sleep and Chronobiology Laboratory published research in 2013 examining what happens to human circadian timing when people spend time in a natural light-dark environment rather than a typical indoor, artificially lit one. Their work, alongside an earlier complementary review by Gene Duffy and Kenneth Wright in 2005, detailing how light timing, intensity, duration, and spectral quality all shape circadian entrainment, demonstrated that exposure to natural outdoor light patterns shifts circadian timing measurably compared to a schedule spent almost entirely under artificial indoor lighting. This research supports the general principle that natural light exposure, particularly earlier in the day, plays a meaningful role in keeping circadian timing aligned with the actual day-night cycle. It does not specifically validate 7 minutes as a minimum effective dose, and this video won't pretend otherwise. 7 minutes is a practical, achievable window, not a number pulled from a dose-response curve in any of this research. One detail from Wright's broader body of research on natural light-dark exposure is worth including here because it illustrates the scale of the effect without overstating it. In related work examining people spending extended time in outdoor camping conditions, away from most artificial lighting, circadian timing shifted measurably earlier and became more tightly synchronized to actual sunrise and sunset compared to the same individual's typical artificially lit schedules back home. That research involved days of near-continuous natural light exposure, not 7 minutes, and it would misrepresent the finding to suggest a single short morning walk produces a comparable shift. What it does illustrate clearly is the underlying principle this video draws on. Natural light, at natural intensity, genuinely does move circadian timing in humans, in a dose-dependent way, with more exposure producing a larger, more reliable effect than less. The third thread has nothing to do with light at all, and concerns the walking itself. Marilee Apezzo and Daniel Schwartz at Stanford University published research in 2014 demonstrating that walking, compared to sitting, measurably increased performance on tasks requiring divergent thinking, the kind of open-ended idea generation involved in brainstorming or creative problem-solving. Their research found this effect held up whether people walked outdoors or on a treadmill, suggesting the walking itself, the rhythmic locomotion, was doing more of the work than the outdoor setting specifically. This doesn't mean 7 minutes of walking guarantees a burst of creativity, permanently raises intelligence, or produces any lasting cognitive upgrade. The research measured a temporary shift in divergent thinking performance during and shortly after walking, not a durable change in cognitive capacity. It's a real, specific, bounded finding, and treating it as more than that would misrepresent what Apezzo and Schwartz actually showed. It's worth noting how they actually measured this, since the specificity of the method is part of what makes the finding credible rather than merely suggestive. Participants completed standardized divergent thinking tasks, generating as many creative uses as possible for an everyday object, for instance, while sitting, while walking on a treadmill facing a blank wall, and while walking outdoors, with performance scored on both the quantity and originality of responses generated in each condition. Walking conditions outperformed sitting consistently across their several experiments, and the treadmill facing a wall condition performed comparably to the outdoor walking condition, which is precisely why the researchers concluded that the locomotion itself, rather than outdoor scenery or fresh air, was the active variable. That detail matters directly for anyone unable to walk outdoors on a given morning. The creativity-related thread of this research doesn't appear to require it. The fourth thread is the one most people find genuinely surprising, because it doesn't depend on using your phone at all. In 2017, Adrian Ward, Kristen Duke, Eilert Nisi, and Martin Boss, working across the University of Texas at Austin and the University of California, San Diego, published research titled Brain Drain, examining whether the mere physical presence of a person's own smartphone, turned off, face down, untouched, could reduce available cognitive capacity on demanding tasks. Their findings suggested that it could, with the effect appearing stronger for tasks requiring more sustained attentional resources, and notably, stronger among participants who reported higher smartphone dependence. This is worth framing precisely as what it is: a contextual, task-dependent experimental effect observed under specific laboratory conditions, not proof that smartphones cause permanent damage to attention or cognition in general. It does suggest something specific and useful for this particular 7 minutes, though: that leaving your phone in another room, rather than simply carrying it silenced, may matter more than intuition would suggest. Their experimental design specifically tested this distance variable, which is why the finding carries more weight than a simple observation that people get distracted by phones. Participants completed cognitively demanding tasks under 3 conditions: phone in another room, phone in a bag or pocket, and phone face down on the desk in front of them, all with the device silenced and unused throughout the entire session. Performance was measurably best in the other room condition, and measurably worst with the phone visible on the desk, with the bag or pocket condition falling in between. A graded relationship with physical distance, not a simple presence or absence effect, which is precisely why this video specifies leaving the phone somewhere you'd have to walk back for, rather than simply keeping it silenced nearby on a nightstand or in a pocket. The clearest way to picture how these four threads combine without merging into one mechanism comes from a manufacturing quality control line, where a single product passes through several independent inspection stations, each testing a completely different variable, one checking structural integrity, another checking electrical function, another checking surface finish, with each station's result recorded and verified entirely separately from the others, even though the product moves through all of them, in one continuous pass down the same line. Nobody would claim that passing the electrical test somehow proves the structural test also passed, or vice versa. The two measurements are independent, verified separately, and simply happen to occur back-to-back on the same physical object. Your 7-minute walk works the same way. The light exposure station and the walking station and the no phone station are each independently documented, each testing something different. And the fact that they happen to occur together during one ordinary morning walk doesn't fuse them into a single proven mechanism. It just means one practical, achievable action happens to move you through all three inspection points at once. If separating four different research threads instead of collapsing them into one tidy claim is the kind of rigor you'd want more of, subscribing keeps that approach coming without you having to search for it, and a like on this video genuinely helps this kind of careful, hedge where necessary content find the people who actually want it over the version that overpromises. Extend this outward into what a typical modern waking sequence actually looks like for most adults. Surveys of smartphone habits consistently find that a large share of people check their phone within the first several minutes of waking, often before getting out of bed at all, encountering a screen and a stream of notifications before any natural light, before any movement, and before any attentional space free of a device demanding evaluation. This isn't a moral failing. It's simply the default sequence most modern mornings have quietly settled into, one that happens to skip all three of the independently documented inputs described above, replacing them with exactly the kind of stimulus the fourth thread suggests may compete for limited cognitive resources before the day has properly started. Two consequences of that default sequence get consistently misread. The first is a familiar, sluggish difficulty getting genuinely alert in the first hour of the day, often blamed simply on not being a morning person or needing more caffeine. Part of what may be happening, without claiming a single proven cause, is that several independently useful inputs, natural light, movement, uncluttered attention, are being skipped simultaneously, right at the window, when at least some of that research suggests they matter most. The second is a specific kind of mental staleness that shows up when trying to think through a problem early in the day, sometimes described as feeling stuck before even really starting. Opezzo and Schwartz's research doesn't promise this resolves with a walk, but it does describe a real, measured shift in divergent thinking performance associated with walking specifically, which makes an unmoving, screen-first morning at minimum a missed opportunity relative to what a brief walk has been shown to produce under controlled conditions. The common explanation for a slow, foggy start to the day leans on personality, sleep quality, or simply needing more coffee before anything is expected of you. The evidence doesn't replace any of those explanations, but it does add a specific, testable alternative worth ruling in or out for yourself. You may not be lazy or simply wired for slow mornings. You may be starting each day having skipped several separately documented inputs your attention and arousal systems have at least some evidence of responding to, replaced from the very first waking moment by exactly the kind of stimulus research suggests may compete for the attention you're trying to muster. This is testable in a genuinely simple way, without needing to take any of the four research threads on faith. A week of mornings that begin with the phone in another room and a short walk, compared honestly against a week of mornings that begin the usual way, will tell you more about your own particular response than any study summary in this video possibly could, since none of the underlying research was measuring you specifically. An individual variation in how strongly any of these four threads applies is exactly the kind of thing self-observation is suited to catching that a population-level study, averaged across hundreds of strangers, simply cannot. What this 7-minute window doesn't advertise is how unevenly the smartphone presence effect described by Ward and colleagues applies across different people and different tasks. Their research found the effect was more pronounced among participants who scored higher on measures of smartphone dependence and more pronounced on tasks requiring greater working memory and sustained attention than on simpler ones. This isn't a uniform tax applied equally to everyone regardless of circumstance. It's a real but variable effect, larger for some people and some tasks than others, which is part of why this video treats it as a reasonable contributing factor worth testing for yourself, rather than a guaranteed, universal, cognitive penalty. There's a broader historical point worth making. Without overreaching into evolutionary storytelling, this video hasn't earned the right to make with certainty. For most of human history, morning simply didn't offer the option this video is describing people avoid. There was no artificial light bright enough to substitute for the sun, no device capable of claiming attention before the body had even left a sleeping position, and very little reason a typical morning wouldn't already involve both outdoor light and physical movement as an ordinary, unremarkable byproduct of simply starting the day's necessary tasks. The specific combination this video recommends isn't a discovery. It's closer to a description of what a human morning generally looked like by default for most of history, before several independent modern conveniences made it possible to skip all three components simultaneously and easily for the first time at scale. It's worth being precise about what changed and roughly when. Widespread indoor electric lighting is barely more than a century old. The smartphone, specifically the kind capable of demanding attention through notifications the moment someone wakes, is barely 2 decades old. Both changes arrived recently enough on the timescale of human history that no one is arguing your biology has adapted to expect them, and neither has to be framed as an ancient evolutionary mismatch to explain why removing them, even briefly, might restore something closer to a default condition rather than introducing anything unusual, exotic, or new. None of this means a phone-free morning walk treats or prevents any diagnosed anxiety disorder, depressive disorder, hormonal imbalance, attention disorder, or sleep condition, and nothing in the research cited here should be read as a substitute for appropriate clinical care where that's genuinely needed. This also isn't a claim that skipping your phone for 7 minutes automatically lowers cortisol, raises dopamine, resets your circadian clock, or permanently improves your concentration. The research supports more modest, more specific, more separated claims than that, and stacking them into one dramatic before and after story would misrepresent every study cited in this video, however satisfying that dramatic version might be to hear. Leave your phone somewhere you genuinely have to walk back for, not simply face down within reach, since the research on mere presence suggests physical distance matters more than whether the screen is visible or the sound is on. If outdoor access is available and weather allows, take it. The light-related threads described here depend specifically on natural, outdoor intensity light, which indoor lighting, even near a bright window, generally doesn't replicate at the same intensity. If outdoor access genuinely isn't available on a given morning, walking indoors still engages the locomotion-related thread on its own, even without the light component. Weather and season will change how much of the light-related thread you're able to access on any given morning, and that's fine. An overcast morning still typically delivers substantially more light intensity than an indoor room, even if it falls well short of full direct sunlight, and the walking and no phone threads remain fully available regardless of cloud cover or season. There's no need to wait for a clear sky to get value from this, and no need to treat a gray, rainy morning as a reason to skip the walk entirely. rather than simply adjusting expectations about which of the three threads is doing the most work that particular day. Keep the pace comfortable, rather than pushing for exercise intensity. The walking research cited here didn't require vigorous effort, simply sustained rhythmic movement. And turning this into a demanding workout changes the exercise into something else entirely, with its own separate physiology. This video isn't attempting to address here. Stay aware of your immediate surroundings, rather than treating this as a chance to zone out completely, particularly near traffic or uneven terrain, since attentiveness to your environment is a basic safety matter, independent of anything else discussed in this video. What weakens the value of this practice? Bringing your phone along just in case, which reintroduces the exact variable the fourth thread suggests may matter most. Doing this only occasionally rather than as a repeatable part of how mornings typically start, since single isolated attempts are unlikely to reveal much about a pattern that would only become genuinely noticeable with some real consistency over days or weeks. And expecting a specific, dramatic outcome each time, given that none of the four research threads described here promise a reliable, immediate, individually guaranteed effect on any single particular morning. Try this tomorrow if today's already underway, and afterward, tell me in the comments which of the three threads felt most noticeable to you personally: the light, the movement, or simply the absence of your phone for those 7 minutes. I genuinely like to know whether people consistently notice one more than the others, or whether the answer turns out to be different for nearly everyone who tries it. Most videos in this format end by tying everything into one clean, satisfying takeaway. This one won't, because the honest version of this story doesn't offer one. You didn't do one thing this morning. You did 3 separate things that happened to fit inside a single 7-minute walk, each backed by its own research, each with its own limits, none of them a guarantee. That's a less dramatic ending than most Mornings Matter videos are willing to give you. It also happens to be the accurate one. And accurate has to count for something, even when it's less satisfying than the alternative.